policy change, capacity building of law enforcement agencies, judiciary, and grassroots activists to tackle animal cruelty and abuse. She then went on to manage Farm Animal Protection Department. Within the department, Shreya leads the End Battery Cage campaign through litigation, advocacy, and corporate outreach to eliminate the use of battery cages for housing egg-laying hens in India. She also oversees projects and campaigns for farm animal protection undertaken by HSI India. So I believe HSI is doing great work when it comes to farm animal protection.
Thank you.
So, welcome, ma'am. It's really an honor to have you here. I don't think there was anyone who could, tell us about this particular topic because you've worked so much in it. So, do you want to say something before we start with questions?
Nothing other than thank you for having me on your platform. I think it's very important to look at farm animal issues. I've been working on it for very few years now. But then, like you said, it's an issue that doesn't get due attention, even in the animal protection movement itself. Even though the most impact on animal welfare, the largest number of animals that are suffering are animals farmed for food, and then animals that are used in experimentation. But these have just become numbers. But I'm glad that people are recognizing it, and there's more consumer awareness now than ever was before. So I think it's a definitely positive indication that we're talking about.
Indeed, even I have seen people becoming more aware about this, and they wouldn't mind going that inch to adopt measures which are in favor of animals, which are towards animal welfare. So that is one change that we are seeing. It's a long road though. So let's start. First, I want to know about the current system of egg production in India and outside. So, and how does it affect the welfare of hens?
Okay. Before I talk about the current systems of production, I think to understand what impacts what about this practice is so terrible for the hens, you have to first understand why it impacts their welfare. You have to first understand the birds themselves. Like one of my colleagues always says that the most interaction that people have with hens, with chickens, is on their plate. So now chickens and hens are just food items for most people and not recognized for what they are. Birds, very intelligent birds at that. So I'm going to give you a little peek into the lives of hens, so to say. I'll just share my screen. I think visuals will help. Could you enable screen sharing? Thank you.
You can share, right?
No, the host is disabled. Just screen sharing, so if you would, yeah.
Okay, ma'am, now can you do it? Just check. I'll just, while you're sharing, I'll just say that, we'll be taking questions at the end of the webinar. Yeah. So if in the audience has any questions, you can just write it in the chat and we'll take it up after the end of the webinar.
Okay. I'm still unable to share. 1 second. There. Okay. Okay, so things that we um, don't know about hens, because to us they're portrayed as food items. Hens are birds. They have certain behaviors that are very intrinsic, that are very natural to them. Like foraging, for example. For most amount of their day, hens forage because that's how they feed. Foraging is an important natural behavior. Sorry. Yes. Are you able to see my PPT?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Another very important behavior for hens is laying eggs. Like any birds, they build nests, they lay eggs, they like to lay eggs in privacy. It's not just a behavior that's necessary in terms of their physical well-being, but also their mental well-being, because hens have a biological need to nest. Every time before they're ready to lay eggs, there's a signal sent to their brain that automatically makes them want to search for a safe private area where they're able to lay eggs. This is what they generally look like. There is a lot of science to support how essential these behaviors are for hens. Nesting, for example, there were studies carried out where a hen was given a motivation in terms of food. If they push a certain door to get, if they push a certain amount of weight to get somewhere, there is a source of food over there. If they push another amount of weight, there is a source of nest over there. Even after 27 hours of feed deprivation, the hen has constantly chosen to push more weight to get to the nest than to get to the food. So for them, the need to nest is stronger than the need to eat. That's how important this behavior is. Again, because these are birds that are prey species, it is important for them to roost and perch. Their claws are designed, and you can see in that image, their claws are designed such that they have to hold on to something to perch. They have to perch, they have to roost at a height because that's where they feel safe. It is very important not just as this behavior, but also because it improves their bone strength. If you were sitting all the time, it would be hard for you to walk. Your bones would be weak, your muscles would be weak. It's the same thing for the hens. They need to perch and they need to roost at night. You and I, when it's night, we go to bed to go to sleep. Hens go up on a tree or some height to roost. Right? Again, more motivational tests were carried out to see how much motivation the hen has to push through weight to get to a perch, to have access to a perch. And repeatedly, hens chose to push more weight to get to a perch than they did to get to food. Dust bathing is another important behavior. This is how they clean themselves. This is how they stay free of parasites. This is also a very important social activity for them. Like you would go out to hang out with your friends or do anything like that. Hence, when one hen starts dust bathing, then they all join in. So it's not just something that keeps them free of parasites and healthy, but it's also something that they do socially as a group behavior. So these are all very important behaviors for hens for their physical and their mental well-being. Whether it's perching, roosting, nesting, these are all essential behaviors. So this is what a daily life of a hen looks like, right? Morning when they're perching, they come down, they start foraging and feeding. Sometime around the afternoon, they get prepared to find their private nest area, lay an egg, and they go out and they do the social activities, dusting, then they continue foraging, and then later in the evening after sunset, they find another safe spot to sit and roost. This is their daily behavior pattern. This is what the hen needs to do to have a healthy life. It's their natural behavior. But this is the current system of egg production. This is how hens live their lives day and night in these crowded barns, crammed in what are called the battery cages. These cages are called battery cages because they're stacked like batteries. If you open the back of your remote, how the batteries are stacked next to each other, there is no gap. There are rows of cages, generally 3 or 5 tiers high, and this is how they are. It's made of just barren wire. There's nothing else. There's 8 to 10 hens crammed in each 2 by 2 cage, which means each hen has just enough space, just the amount of space that it occupies, just standing there. There's not enough space for all of them to simultaneously stand together or sit down together. Some of them have to be standing, some of them have to be sitting for them to have enough space. The floor of these cages are also this barren wire. So instead of perching like their claws are designed to naturally, they have their foot flat on this barren wire constantly. This is their entire life from when they're just weeks old until they're a year and a half old, by which time their egg production dips, and so they're what the industry calls depopulation, ripped out of their cages and sent off for slaughter because they're unable to produce an egg every day. It is again a trait selection that has resulted in the hens laying an egg every day. Their predecessor is red jumbled fowl, the great-great-grandfather of all of these hens and chickens that we see now. And that bird used to lay about 16 to 18 eggs a year. These birds are trait selected to lay 320 eggs a year, 270 to 320 eggs a year, which means they're laying an egg every single day of their life. Now, all the minerals, all the nutrients that are required that come to the egg come from the body of the hen. So it's an entire life of just laying 1 egg every day in this situation, where the eggs, even the floor of the cage is slanted. It's not straight, so they're not standing like this all the time. They're standing like this all the time, tilted forward, because it's designed such that the second the hen lays the egg rolls out onto this collection tray from where it is picked up. Now, because of the arrangement of the cage, this kind of facility is also impossible to clean. So the cobwebs and all that you see in the image are not unique to this facility. Any egg-laying facility, egg production facility that you visit, this will be the condition. These hens again are not old as they might seem in the photo, because their feathers are falling off and their necks are bare and they're pale. This is because of the conditions that they live in. Constant friction with the side of the cage, constant friction with each other causes it. They're so frustrated staying like this that they're known to peck each other. They're known to rip their feathers out in frustration. It's akin to sit in one spot locked up. You eat there, you defecate there, your entire life is there. So you, of course, end up ripping your hair out. That's the kind of behavior that is caused because of this intensive confinement. Again, because they don't want their birds pecking at each other and injuring themselves, which will mean high mortality. What they do is cut off the beak of the bird just when they're, just right after they've hatched. In a couple of weeks, their beaks are cut off with a hot plate. And we'll get to a little bit more of those practices later. But that is the current life of an egg-laying hen. Now, so 1 second. Yeah. So it's in India, there are more than 40 crores egg-laying hens that live their lives like this in battery cages, enclosures that are so small that they can't, you've seen the images, they can't even move around. Forget spreading their wings like we need some arm space. They can't even stand up straight without touching each other, without having friction against the side of the cage. Of course, they prevent all normal forms of behavior, nesting, perching, dust bathing, which are all very, very important. But it's just the most basic life the hen could have. These are intrinsic behaviors. They're not luxuries. They're denied even the normal movement. All of this results in many physical ailments. constantly being in that cramped position causes osteoporosis. Constantly laying eggs causes reproductive problems, liver problems, fatty liver hemorrhagic syndromes. There are diseases that are intrinsic to intensive confinement facilities. Just because they live in those conditions, they have these common diseases. Once their productivity means, like I said, in a year and a half, the hens are depopulated, and because of the osteoporosis, even the slightest movement in how they are handled causes bones to break, snap like dry twigs when they're removed from cages. Now, once they are removed, they are of course transported to roadside hookahs, to dhabas, or anywhere, long distances, to be slaughtered, and generally slaughtered by throat cutting. Not to mention the other sad side of this is that the male chicks that are born in the egg industry are what are considered byproducts, because of course they don't produce eggs. They're killed soon after they're hatched, and the females move on to the blade to be their beaks, beaks to be chopped off with a hot blade, and of course there's no pain management. For a hen, it's only limb. We have hands that we use to feel things and everything. For a hen, it's the beak. There's a lot of sensitive nerve endings in a hen's beak, and this is chopped off without any pain management to prevent them from pecking at each other, which is a behavior that manifests, of course, because of the conditions that they are reared in. Throughout the egg production industry, the bird's welfare is severely impaired.
I'm so glad you showed us the pictures. Yeah, there's it said know your meat, so you know your egg, like where it's coming from.
Yeah.
So this like I have to ask, what are the laws and rules with respect to this? Like, is this allowed?
So it would be I think it's a huge misconception that there are no laws. I think there's enough and more. There's the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act 1960, which covers all animals, including hens. Look at the definition of animal in the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. It says all animals except humans, which of course covers hens as well. Section 11 of the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act 11.1 lays out all the actions or omissions that amount to offences. What constitutes to animal cruelty is laid out in Section 11.1. So a specific clause, Section 11.1e of the Act says that no animal shall be confined in a receptacle or a cage that does not measure sufficiently by height, length, or breadth to allow reasonable opportunity of movement. A battery cage by no means provides even the most basic opportunity of movement. There's no space to even stand up. So reasonability is out of the question. The Supreme Court in the Nagaraja judgment, which you may have discussed in one of your webinars before, read the statutory rights of animals that are there in the PCA Act under Section 3 and under Section 11 to fall within the scope of Article 21, the right to life. It's a fundamental right. These statutory rights, again, were also read with the 5 freedoms of animals that are recognized by OIE, the World Organization for Animal Health. Right, the 5 freedoms: to be free from pain and injury, to be free from fear and distress, freedom to express natural behavior, to be free from hunger and thirst. All of these freedoms are read into the statutory rights of animals. So, of course, there is no doubt, there is no debate that battery cages are a violation of the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. Of course, there have been recommendations by expert body. Way back in 2012, the Animal Welfare Board of India, which is the statutory body that's required to keep the government of India under advisement on animal welfare laws, in 2012 said that battery cages are violated, and all the states at that time, including the central government, issued directions saying battery cages are violating the PCA and they have to be phased out. The Law Commission in 2017 published a report. It's report number 269 for anybody who wants to refer it. In that they categorically stated that battery cages are inherently cruel and must be phased out. They went one step ahead and looked at the rules that the Animal Welfare Board of India had recommended to develop some minimum standards for how to rear hens. What are the minimum standards that you have to follow if you're rearing hens, and improved those drafts and recommended the same to the government of India. There's a litigation ongoing in the Delhi High Court in this regard for minimum standards to be developed. And there have been multiple orders from the Delhi High Court. They've taken the Law Commission report into consideration. They've taken the AWPI's recommendation into consideration. In fact, in September of 2018, they directed the government of India to prohibit new battery cages from being set up until minimum standards were developed in accordance with the recommendation of the Law Commission, keeping in consideration the welfare of animals, taking into consideration the statutory rights of animals under PCA. So there is no doubt that battery cages are inhumane, violative of the law. What we are lacking is minimum standards. Now there are a certain set of draft rules that the government of India did propose. However, there is no semblance of welfare in those draft rules. The current amount of space that a hen gets in a battery cage is about 450 centimeters square, which is less than an A4 size sheet of paper. What the government of India recommended in their proposed rules is 550 square centimeters, which is still less than an A4 size sheet of paper, and that 100 centimeters square isn't doing anybody any good. They still can't spread their wings. That said, the proposed rules also recommended that each cage should have 6 to 8 birds. Now, I hardly find that is implementable, because which government authority will we expect in this vast country to go to each battery cage farm, which has a minimum of 50,000 birds on one facility, to go to each cage and count how many birds there are in each cage. So the proposed rules that exist now are not notified, are not law, and are definitely not implementable. So there are no standards, but it's clear that battery cages are, that is not a debate anymore. Battery cages are, the use of battery cage is a punishable offense according to the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act.
Right. It seems as if the government also thinks that it's just the battery cages. You can just keep increasing the size by minimum amount, and you can keep stacking hens inside. That's something that you very rightly said, hens have just become like food for us and not birds, like how we consider any other animal.
Right. It's unfortunate.
It's very important to think of them as animals when any law is being made, like living, breathing creatures.
Absolutely.
So, is this current system of egg production, it has an impact on any other thing other than animal welfare? Is it just animal welfare, or there are other aspects to it?
So there is a long list of issues that are complementary to battery cages, to any system of intensive animal agriculture. I'm going to again show you an image, and so this is what a zoomed out image of a battery cage facility looks like. The construction of a battery cage facility is such that there is a raised barn. The cages are fitted in the barn, and there is an opening right under the cages. The cages are in a step system, a tier system. So all the droppings from the bird, all the waste from the birds are collected below the barn. So from the birds being put into these battery cages when they're ready to start laying eggs, till the time that they're depopulated. So for approximately 72 weeks, there is waste collecting under these barns. This is what it
Since it's a tier system, so the birds at the top, at the bottom would it would get all the feces of the top birds at the top, right?
No, so they're in the stepwise format. It's like steps.
Okay.
So it's not one on top of the other. It's a stepwise system. So it all falls below, and this is what it looks like. This is just about the hens could have been in the cage for a month or so. They're going to be there for a longer time, so this pile keeps increasing. So this is what it looks like outside a battery cage system. Now, so the environmental repercussions are one thing. The health of those living on these facilities, the labor generally stays on the premises because there's feeding to be done, there's collecting of the eggs twice a day to be done. So there's people living on these premises that work in these facilities. There's people living in the vicinity, or everybody is affected by these intensive systems. Like you saw, the common view is that there's a general 2 to 3 foot pile of litter and feces. Add to this, when it rains or when there's wastewater farms, you get contaminated soil, air, you get the slurry, the water mixed with the waste being washed into the soil. If there is water bodies close by, then these feces being washed into the water. There is high volume of waste, there's lack of recycling, there's no waste management system. So of course the soil, the air quality, the water quality in that vicinity is affected. Again, the waste also has emissions. There's toxic gases produced when the feces breaks down. Ammonia is a common emission from animal waste, especially bird waste. There's high instance of ammonia in bird waste. Typical battery cage farm will also see houseflies in thousands, maggots and houseflies in thousands, because there's so much waste, stagnant waste. It not only affects the health of the workers, because of course they do not have any protective equipment to be walking. If you go to any battery cage farm, you will see people wading without chappal in all of this waste. There's also, the emissions from these facilities affect those living in the surrounding areas. Long-term exposure to ammonia and all of the other emissions that come out of this kind of facility can cause chronic respiratory distresses. And long-term, there's a lot of suffering with chronic respiratory diseases, but these are also fatal at some points. So there's a definite public health hazard, and there is environmental degradation. This has recently been taken into consideration by the National Green Tribunal. And an order was issued up until last week. The guidelines that the Central Pollution Board issues for different industries as to what they have to, standards that they have to follow under the Environment Protection Act. All of those standards, all of the environmental laws and norms, the poultry industry was exempt from if the facility had 1 lakh or less number of birds. 1 lakh birds in one facility, and they were exempt from any environmental norms. So all the waste that is generated, you didn't have to apply for consent for setting up. So nobody was monitoring where you're setting up, if there are residential areas nearby, if there are water bodies nearby, that all this runoff and emissions from these facilities can affect. There was no monitoring whatsoever. Of course, we brought this to the attention of the National Green Tribunal in Delhi, and after 3 years, the principal bench directed that exemption would not apply unless the facility has 5,000 or less birds. The smaller farmers, smaller facilities, lesser birds are exempt, but any facility having more than 5,000 hens or chickens is required to be under the purview of the Environment Protection Act to be monitored by the Central Pollution Control Board. So hopefully, with some monitoring, there might be some more regulations, they might take some more care, but then the amount of waste, if you still continue to cram animals in these intensive confinement facilities, the amount of waste that you generate is not going to go anywhere. It's just going to pile up, whether you let it run off in the water or whether you dig a hole in the ground and fill it in. It's still going to affect groundwater, it's still going to affect soil. It's just the public health hazard, the environmental repercussions of intensive animal agriculture are numerous. We pay in more ways than one. Egg might seem like a cheap nutrition, something that we're buying for 5 rupees for breakfast, but we may be paying 5 rupees at the shop to buy one egg, but we're paying in terms of animal welfare, we're paying in terms of compromising our environment, we're paying very long-term, very expensive costs for our health.
So true, so true. So, ma'am, like in such conditions, these birds definitely, like, do they catch diseases, and how does it affect the egg that that they are laying? Is there any health repercussion there?
There is, in fact, Europe Europe prohibited battery cages in 2012. So the phase out was to kick in, and every egg production facility was required to move away from battery cages from 2012. And that decision of the European Union was based on a study that their Food Safety Authority carried out. So the European Food Safety Authority, EFSA, had in 2007 carried out a study, and it found that the instances of salmonella contamination is highest in intensive confinement facilities, in battery cage facilities. And it's a matter of logic. We shouldn't have to wait for science to tell us or studies to tell us that if you cram a large number of living beings together in one tiny space, there are bound to be disease outbreaks. Just the number of disease outbreaks in reports of bird flu, and if you map them, all of them come from the states that produce the highest number of eggs. Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, all of these states report bird flu time and again. Now, while this pandemic is going on, there were reports in 5 states of bird flu outbreak just 2 months ago. Right? Anywhere where there is intensive confinement, there are going to be disease outbreaks.
Yes.
I mean, if this pandemic has taught us anything, it should be that we shouldn't be cramming animals together.
Yeah, it has actually brought in a lot of focus on animals and the food that we are eating. Like all that has been, just to know what you are eating, what you're putting inside, and what's on your plate. It's very important. Now, initially, you were telling us about the male chicks that they are killed almost immediately when they are born, and their beaks are, broken, and no, they are immediately, like I was seeing this, and they are grinded, or they are fed. They are actually fed to even hens. It's almost like cannibalism.
Yeah.
So what can be done, because they are no use to this industry? So what can be done to protect them?
So I'll give you a longer answer, but the short and simple answer to that is reduction and replacement. We reduce the amount of eggs that we eat, and we replace eggs with better sources of protein, more accessible sources of protein. Why that is, and not, how do you know what is going to hatch out of the egg until the egg hatches? And it is not economically viable for the industry to have to grow these hens because they're trade selected. Before the commercialization, before hens became either layers or broilers, either can be used for meat or to be used for eggs. We had whatever native birds that provided sustenance to people, because how did you get your eggs and meat? You had a couple of chickens in your backyard, and they provided you. They were dual purpose. As long as they laid eggs, the eggs were utilized. When they stopped laying eggs, they were chicken meat. But that's not possible anymore, because the birds are trait selected to such an extent that everybody's used to this specific broiler type of meat, where they put on, the broilers are another horror story, right? They put on massive amounts of weight. They trait selected to put on massive amounts of weight. In 42 days, they're prepared for slaughter. They're still chicks, but they don't look like chicks, because that's how they've been trait selected. Or there are these hens that don't put on muscle weight. They're thin birds, because they are required to be shoved into these tight battery cages, so that they just spend their life laying eggs. So what do you do with hens chickens that you can't use for meat production? If you have to feed them and rear them until they grow older, which they will take a year and a half to grow, as opposed to the broilers that are grown in 42 days. What do you do? It's economically unviable, so we can round them up and feed them back to the hens. Of course, that was a source of a lot of diseases. So that practice is not very prevalent now. But the hens, the male chicks are still ground up, or they're just suffocated. There are these, industrial tubs, giant blue industrial tubs with lids. All the chicks are dumped in that, and the lid is shut. So they, when they die as they suffocate, one on top of the other, and the lid closed. Either they are crushed, suffocated to death, drowned. Sometimes they fill water in the tub and then dump the chicks in, or there have been reports of them being set on fire to be killed. So it's just the most horrible thing. Layers are either born to be crushed and burnt alive or drowned, or they're born to live this life confined in this horrible barren wire cage until they can stop laying eggs. So all we can do is reduce our consumption. The volumes of production for this created demand are completely unnecessary. Our food habits were fine. It's not recognized as, but a lot of the eggs that are produced, more than 70% of the eggs that are produced, are distributed in urban areas, where there is malnutrition, where a cheap source of protein can at least be useful. In rural India, that's not where the eggs are reaching. In fact, the industry has monopolized this business so much that the people who used to grow hens, chickens in their backyard can't do it anymore, because how will they bring their produce to the market? It's too little. So all of the backyard poultry, all of the small scale farmers are pushed out of the business, and you can only be a part of this business if you have 50,000 or more birds, which means these giant commercial setups, intensive systems that are no good for anybody's health, no good for environment, and don't even provide that nutrition that they say that eggs provide, because it's not going to people that need them. So all we can do is make sure that one, we replace the eggs that we eat with better sources of protein, greens, pulses, plant-based, that are sustainable, that are locally grown. One of the major alternative companies that exists in the world, Just Egg, it's an alternate egg. It's basically plant-based egg. So it's not coming from a chicken, it's coming from plants, and you can make great scrambled eggs with it. The testament to the fact that they create eggs is that I detest them. They smell too much like eggs, and I could never stand the smell of eggs. So I can definitely vouch for the fact that those are definitely as good as eggs when you make scrambled whatever it is that you make with eggs. But those are made with moong dal, which we grow enough and more here. So instead of processing something and making it something else, instead of paying through our noses in hospital bills and still continuing to eat eggs, we could move to other more sustainable options.
So the plant-based egg is made out of moong dal.
Yeah, and it's sold internationally. It's not here yet, but there are other alternate eggs that will come up in the next couple of years for anybody who believes that they can't live without eggs.
Wow, that is something new that I've heard today. So, you were actually telling us about how, eat food that is locally grown, which is so true. I was just reading it somewhere that, you should see how much your food is traveling,
Yeah,
because there's an ecological footprint also that it's not healthy if
yeah,
the food is traveled so much, and you should.
yeah,
That is why people should be eating more of what is grown locally in their state that they are living in.
yeah. And the best thing that you can do for the environment, I mean, it's not necessary that everybody is able to relate to animals, whether it's dogs, cats, chickens. It's if not everybody has to care about doing something for the animals, but if you care about the planet, if you care about having pleasure. The best thing you can do for the animals, for your health, for the planet, is to go plant-based. It reduces your carbon footprint. I mean, carbon footprint for transporting these eggs is one thing, but just the environmental impact of the facility itself, just on ground zero, is so high. You're cutting that out. Uh, the conditions that the labor on these facilities have to endure is just a whole different violation of human rights. The public health hazard of the people living in the nearby areas, again, a whole different human rights violation. So there are so many things that you could address, multiple social issues that you can address just by eliminating eggs from your diet.
So now you're telling about battery cages and how it is a health hazard for public health. So what to do? Like, how can we end this cruelty that the hens face in this industry?
Right. So there's two things one you can do. The best thing that you can do for them, and the good thing that you can do for them. The good thing that you can do for them is demand that every time that you buy eggs, you at least make sure that they are from cage-free facilities and not from intensive confinement facilities. There are quite a few producers now that have cage-free facilities where these eggs come from, free range, like the one you're seeing in my backdrop. It's a free range facility, not in India, but this is a general idea. This is in fact where people think their eggs come from. Every time people think about eggs, they think about these rolling green meadows and hens hopping around and foraging. That's so far from the truth. But there are some producers that practice this kind of farming, free range farming, or indoor cage-free farming, where it's in a barn but they're not shut up in cages. And they have access to nest boxes, perches. It's still indoor, no outdoor access, but there is still some freedom, some movement. So the good thing, the least that you can do is, of course, make sure that you're buying cage-free eggs. When you go to your favorite restaurants, to your hotels, ask them to make sure they also procure cage-free eggs. Tell them to tell their egg suppliers that we only want eggs that come from cage-free facilities and nothing that comes from battery cages. That is something that when consumers demand it, when consumer institutions demand it, that's when the practices will change. The best thing, of course, that you can do for them, like I said before, is to replace them with better sources of protein. Better not just in terms of the amount of protein that you can get from something, but also in terms of how sustainable it is, how cruelty-free it is. So starting with reducing how much eggs you consume in a week, to replacing those eggs with plant-based sources is what is ultimately going to end this cruelty.
So, ma'am, do we actually get this kind of egg where are there facilities, cage-free facilities in India? And are these eggs available in the market?
Yes, they are across a lot of India. Of course, if you go to rural India, I'm sure you find somebody still for their own household growing hens in the backyard, and I'm sure you can do some barter system over there. But in urban areas, in tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 cities, All retail markets will carry cage-free, free-range eggs. Happy Hens, Farm Made, Eggs, Hen Food. Just off the top of my head, these are some of the brands that supply cage-free eggs. Happy Hens and Farm Made is in fact free-range.
Yeah, this was something I did not know.
Available everywhere. Now, the hesitation that some people have is these eggs are a little more expensive than your regular caged egg. But that's because the caged eggs is externalizing the cost. They're making sure they're not paying their labor enough. There's no waste management. There's no space for the hens. There's no appropriate nutrition for the hens. The cage-free farms are making sure that there is animal welfare. Hence, of course, there's going to be a higher cost of production. But at least you know that you'll be paying the true cost of the eggs when you're buying cage-free or free-range, as opposed to paying 5 rupees for the eggs and then paying 5 lakhs when you're hospitalized because of all the public health that these that comes with intensive confinement.
Also, with more demand of such eggs, I'm sure, like it's basic economics, and if the demand goes up, the price will gradually go down.
Absolutely. The scale of economy will work out. Yeah.
Yes. So, ma'am, is it okay if we take questions from the audience now?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So, we do have one. If there's any questions. Yeah. Is the waste used as a natural fertilizer? The waste
So the longer the waste stays under the facility, the more it breaks down, the more ammonia it releases, and nobody wants to use that. So when it is still moist, it may be used as a fertilizer. But the thing is, it's way too expensive because all of these facilities are generally along highways. It's way too expensive to load on the waste, put it on a truck, and send it to a farm. So a very small, insignificant percentage of waste from these facilities is purchased to be used as manure on farm, but only initially, like in the first month or so when the waste hasn't broken down completely and hardened, or doesn't become slurry if there's a rainfall or waterlogging somewhere. But largely no, slightly yes. But again, not too much, very little of it. The amount of waste that is generated and the amount that can be used as manure, vast difference.
So, are these cages like cleaned every day? Because like the amount of waste that is generated in a day would be huge. So, are they cleaned every day?
Impossible to clean a battery cage facility. It's basically wire mesh bundled together in long rows. So any facility that you go to, like the photo I showed you, you are bound to see cobwebs hanging off everywhere. The waste as it's dropping down is stuck to the wire of the cage and the floor of the cage. Never cleaned. The waste itself is cleaned maybe when the hens are being depopulated. So every year and a half, the waste from under the barn is moved, either pushed into a water body if it's close by, if initially in the first 2 months not sold as manure, then or a hole in the ground and buried there. So no, all the waste comes back to bite us because it's just going back into the environment.
Hence the smell if you pass from an area.
Yeah, it's impossible to get rid of that smell.
So, another question is, if the law exists that essentially state battery cages are illegal, why do large-scale facilities exist and what can we do about it?
So, it's a practice by the industry itself. A lot of things it's clear in the law that it is illegal, but because it has been practiced for a certain amount of time, it is being continued, which is why the litigation in the Delhi High Court was necessary for the implementation of the existing law and the directives of the Government of India itself in 2013, of the Animal Welfare Code India in 2012, All of these exist, but why it's continuing is that it's a practice, it's a vertically integrated industry. There's just a handful of people that control the entire egg production and supply chains in the country. So it is still being practiced, but we are working hard through litigation, through trying to work with the government to get this law implemented. And I think it was a incredibly progressive order of the Delhi High Court, which said we're done with hearing the excuses. We want you to make sure that you don't let one battery cage facility be set up across the country until you make sure there are some minimum standards. Because even from the court's point of view, if not this, then what? They want to make sure that there's some minimum standards that are followed and not just say out with battery cages and then do whatever you please. So we're hoping that in the next couple of hearings, the government of India will also improve the rules that are proposed and we're able to then begin implementing. Implementation has always been a battle for any law in this country.
Exactly. That especially animal law, there's very little amount of implementation done here, even though we have such, forward-looking judgments even by the court. But the implementation is very sad. So, yeah, this question we've already answered. Is there any chance of transferring the disease from hens to the eggs?
So, salmonella is a very popular issue, food poisoning. It can be fatal. So that's pretty common with eggs. Bird flu, just being in the vicinity is sufficient. You don't even have to eat the eggs. But the health hazards are more direct from just the intensive confinement facilities than the eggs themselves.
But yes, I think we should always, research of what we are eating, know your food, where it is coming from. It's very important. That was, apart from my personal viewing of cruelty, I actually started, reading up about how non-veg food and eggs also, I couldn't stand the smell as well. But yeah, so when I came to know about all this, I was like, I can't do this to my health. So it's very important, whatever decision you make. I think it's always important that we know about it. We have the full details.
Yeah.
So any other questions? I think we had 3 questions. We've answered all of them. Ma'am, you want to tell us anything? The work that HSI is doing and how we can contribute.
Absolutely. And I think I've given you the most effective things that you can do. That is also what HSI is doing. We're not doing anything differently from what we're not asking people to do anything differently than what we are already practicing. We are, of course, working to improve public policy, to make sure that there are minimum standards, to help implement the existing policy, to phase out battery cages, which are in violation of the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. We are also working, along with our affiliates across the country, across the world, form one of the world's largest organizations, animal protection organizations. And just HSI itself across the world has worked with over 500 consumer institutions, hotel groups, FMCG companies, food service institutions to help develop their private policies. You may have heard of Marriott's commitment to animal welfare that they will by 2025 go completely cage-free, place-wise manner, which means they will stop buying eggs from battery cage systems and will only buy them from cage-free systems. So we're working with private companies for private policies to help them move away, to make sure there are animal welfare standards in their procurement policies, in their supply chains, which is something that, of course, everybody can do. Any restaurant you go to, any hotel you go to, you must recommend, as a consumer, you must demand that they do not give you eggs that come from these horrible intensive confinement systems. You could, of course, write to your member of parliament in your constituency and ask that they make sure that this law is implemented, that they bring it up in the parliament, that they provide more space to the hens than 450 or 550, that they do away with matricators and provide and support the Law Commission's recommendations, a body that has taken stakeholder opinion, that has combed through all the scientific literature that's available to say that the minimum standards, bare minimum standards for a hen should be this.
Indeed, like the more the public become aware and the more they start, asking such questions and demanding from their leaders, that's when things are going to change. So yeah, to all those people who are here, maybe you should start looking into more plant-based proteins. And if you're going for eggs, then let's demand for eggs that come from cage-free facilities.
Absolutely. The best thing that you can do for the animals is to not eat them.
Yeah.
That's the most animal welfare you can do in all the life.
So true. So true. Thank you so much for coming, ma'am. I really, it was amazing. And thank you for being a voice to these birds. I'm not going to, call them hen, chicken. They are birds. And most of us, maybe we should, start this practice of calling them bird and not chicken.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here.
Bye.